Our mother made us promise never to look for our father, but when we found him, we finally understood why. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m., jolting me awake with a sound I'd never heard before. My mother screaming, "He found us," and the symbols, and "You have to run." The line went dead before I could ask what was happening. When I tried calling back, her phone went straight to voicemail. Daniel was already pulling on clothes when I pounded on his apartment door, his face grim as I explained the call. We'd been living in the same complex since college, close enough to look out for each other, but nothing had prepared us for this moment. The drive to our mother's house took 12 minutes that felt like hours, both of us silent as we processed what we might find. Her front door was hanging open, security chain dangling broken, and the living room looked like a tornado had torn through it. Furniture overturned, family photos scattered across the floor with their glass frames shattered, and on the white wall above the couch, someone had painted a symbol in what looked like dried blood, a circle with intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly. My brother Daniel found our mother's cell phone smashed in the kitchen sink, along with her laptop that had been deliberately destroyed. But it was the basement that made us both freeze in absolute horror. The concrete walls were covered floor to ceiling with photographs, hundreds of them showing Daniel and me at different ages, walking to school, playing in parks, sleeping in our beds. Someone had been watching us our entire lives, documenting every moment with the patience of a predator. In the center of one wall, written in the same dark substance as the symbol upstairs, were the words, "My sons will come home." Below that, an address in Oregon and a date, tomorrow's date. Our mother was nowhere to be found, but a trail of her blood led from the living room to the back door, where tire tracks in the mud showed a large vehicle had been parked. We called 911, but even as we spoke to the dispatcher, we both knew the police wouldn't be fast enough to save her. The detective who arrived an hour later listened to our story with growing skepticism, taking notes as we explained about our mother's warnings and the research we'd done about our father. Detective Rivers was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen enough missing person cases to recognize the patterns, but she kept asking why we thought this was connected to a man our mother claimed to have left 30 years ago. When we showed her the basement filled with surveillance photos, her expression changed completely. She called for a forensics team and started making phone calls to federal agencies, her voice dropping to urgent whispers as she described what they'd found. While we waited for backup, she pulled us aside and explained that cults and extremist religious groups were a growing concern for law enforcement, especially those that had gone underground after initial investigations. She warned us that if our father was still active and had taken our mother, going to Oregon would likely be walking into a trap designed specifically for us. But she also admitted that standard police procedures moved slowly, and our mother might not have time for bureaucratic protocols. Daniel made the decision for both of us while I was still processing the detective's warnings. He grabbed my arm and steered me toward his car, saying we couldn't wait for the system to save our mother when every hour might be her last. The drive to Oregon would take 8 hours if we drove straight through, and the address we'd found could be our only chance to find her before it was too late. Detective Rivers tried to stop us, warning that we were playing into our father's hands by responding exactly as he'd planned, but Daniel was already starting the engine. She pressed her business card into my hand and made me promise to call for backup the moment we had any information. As we pulled out of our mother's driveway, I looked back to see crime scene tape going up around the house where we'd spent countless holidays. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I could see him making the same calculation I was, that we'd rather die trying to save our mother than live knowing we'd been too afraid to try. We made our first stop at a 24-hour Walmart outside Portland, where we bought camping supplies, first aid equipment, and prepaid cell phones that couldn't be traced. While he loaded supplies into the car, I researched the address, discovering that it led to a rural area in the Cascade Mountains, where property records showed large parcels of land owned by something called the Eternal Foundation Trust. The satellite images showed clusters of buildings surrounded by forest, but the resolution wasn't good enough to reveal details about security or how many people might be living there. I found a local news article from 6 months earlier about mysterious lights and sounds coming from the area, with neighbors complaining that authorities refused to investigate despite repeated reports of suspicious activity. One resident was quoted saying that people who asked too many questions about what went on in those mountains had a habit of suddenly deciding to move away or simply disappearing. The final stretch of highway leading into the mountains was eerily empty, with no traffic in either direction, and abandoned gas stations that looked like they'd been closed for years. We passed a checkpoint that appeared to be unmanned, though I noticed security cameras mounted on poles that tracked our vehicle as we drove past. The radio in Daniel's car gradually lost signal until we were driving in complete silence, with only the sound of our engine and the wind through the trees, and what happened next changed everything. Full story is linked below or on my channel.